Aliens declared wolves extinct, then a human showed up with one. The conference room aboard the Galactic Conservation Council's flagship was designed to impress. Crystalline walls curved upward into a dome that displayed the stars beyond, while soft blue lighting made every species present look dignified and important. Representatives from 43 different worlds sat in seats adapted to their various body types, all facing the central podium where Ambassador stood. Which meant he looked somewhat like a mantis that had been stretched to 7 feet tall and given an extra set of arms. His exoskeleton gleamed a deep purple under the lights, and his translator device hung from a golden chain around what passed for his neck. He was considered one of the finest speakers in the council, known for his thoroughness and his gentle way of delivering bad news. Today, he had bad news for the humans. Representatives of Earth began, his actual voice a series of clicks and whistles that the translator converted into smooth, diplomatic standard. It is my unfortunate duty to inform you of a grave ecological loss. After 3 standard years of comprehensive surveys, atmospheric analysis, and biological scanning of your planet's wilderness regions, we have confirmed the extinction of the species known as lupus, commonly called the gray wolf. The human delegation sat in their assigned section, 12 people who had been chosen to represent Earth in galactic matters. Most of them wore the simple blue uniforms of the United Earth Assembly, though a few wore the traditional clothing of their home regions. Ambassador, a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, sat at the center of the group. Her face remained carefully neutral. Continued, bringing up holographic displays that floated above the podium. Images of forests appeared, vast and green and silent. Tundra stretched across the display, empty of large predators. Mountain ranges rose and fell, their valleys devoid of pack hunters. As you can see from our survey data, the wolf has vanished from all previously recorded habitats. Our thermal scanning detected no pack behaviors. Our audio sensors recorded no howling. Our genetic sampling of the environment found no recent wolf DNA in any ecosystem. A delegate, reptilian and sharp-featured, raised one clawed hand. How long has this species been extinct? Our analysis suggests the final populations died out approximately 15 to 20 of their years ago, replied, though the species had been in severe decline for much longer, perhaps a century or more. Murmurs rippled through the assembled aliens. Extinction was always tragic, but the loss of an apex predator was particularly serious. Ecosystems could collapse without their top predators. The fact that humans had allowed this to happen reflected poorly on their application to join the galactic community. Ambassador finally spoke, her voice calm and professional. We acknowledge the Council's findings. Earth has indeed struggled with conservation efforts during our industrial periods. We have lost many species to our own short-sightedness and greed. The wolf populations were severely reduced by hunting, habitat loss, and human expansion. Then you accept our assessment? Asked. We accept that wolf populations were indeed in severe decline, said carefully. We have been working on various restoration and conservation projects. A delegate, whose species looked like floating jellyfish contained in mechanical suits filled with water, pulsed a deep orange color that indicated skepticism. Restoration projects cannot revive extinct species. The translator rendered its burbling speech. The Council's purpose is to document these losses and assist developing species in preventing further damage. We will, of course, provide Earth with educational resources and conservation guidelines. Several other delegates nodded their various heads, stalks, and sensory organs in agreement. This was standard procedure. A species was surveyed, their ecological disasters were documented, and the Council stepped in to prevent further damage. Earth was not the first world to lose an apex predator to its own dominant species' carelessness, and it would not be the last. Pulled up more data, showing population graphs that declined sharply and then flatlined at 0. The wolf occupied a crucial ecological niche. Its loss will have cascading effects on prey species populations, vegetation patterns, and overall ecosystem health. We recommend immediate intervention to stabilize the affected regions. We appreciate the Council's concern, said. Her fellow delegates remained quiet, though a few were exchanging glances that found difficult to interpret. Humans were still new to galactic politics, and their body language often confused other species. We will certainly review your findings and recommendations. The presentation continued for another hour, showed examples from other worlds where apex predator extinctions had caused ecological collapse. He outlined the support the Council could provide, including genetic archives for potential future cloning projects, though he was careful to note that such technology was still experimental and often unsuccessful. The had prepared this presentation carefully, wanting to be both honest about the severity of the situation and hopeful about potential solutions. The human delegates listened politely. They asked a few questions about survey methodology, which answered with pride. The Council's survey teams were the best in the galaxy, using technology that could detect individual organisms from orbit, track migration patterns, and even sample environmental DNA from atmospheric particles. If there had been any significant wolf populations remaining on Earth, they would have found them. When the presentation ended, the Council voted formally to add lupus to the galactic record of extinct species. The motion passed unanimously, with the human delegates abstaining rather than voting against it. Interpreted this as acceptance, perhaps tinged with shame at their species' failure to prevent the loss. We will transmit the full report to Earth within the week, told Ambassador, as the delegates filed out of the conference room. Please do not view this as a criticism of your species. Many civilizations go through difficult transitions on their path to ecological harmony. The important thing is that you learn from these losses and prevent future ones. Of course, replied, her expression unreadable. Thank you for your thoroughness, Ambassador. The news spread quickly through the galactic networks. Earth, the small blue world that had recently made contact with the greater galactic community, had lost one of its most impressive predators. Added the wolf to their databases of extinct megafauna, alongside Earth's lost dire wolves, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths. Educational programs were updated to inform galactic citizens about the dangers of unchecked industrial expansion and the importance of conservation. On Earth, the news was received with reactions ranging from confusion to amusement to outright laughter. Social media filled with images and videos of wolves, all time-stamped within the last year. Wildlife organizations released statements pointing out that wolf populations in North America and Eurasia were actually increasing in many areas. Several particularly sarcastic humans suggested that someone should probably tell the wolves they were extinct. But the galactic community did not see these responses. The Council's report was official, thorough, and backed by 3 years of advanced survey technology. A few social media posts from a species that barely understood faster-than-light travel were hardly going to overturn such comprehensive scientific data. 3 weeks after the Council's announcement, a request came through the bureaucratic channels to Sanctuary Station, the Council's massive orbital headquarters. A human freighter captain named Sarah Vance wanted permission to dock. Her cargo manifest listed standard goods, spare parts, and personal belongings. She was returning from a transport run to one of the outer mining colonies and wanted to stop at the station before heading back to Earth. The station's AI processed the request automatically. Captain Vance had all the proper permits and documentation. Her ship's reactor signature matched her registration. Everything was in order, except for one small notation that the AI flagged for a junior clerk to review. The clerk, a young named Paulshead who was working his first real job after finishing his education, looked at the flagged item with mild curiosity. Under additional passengers, Captain Vance had listed one emotional support animal species, Lupus, name, Ghost. Paul's water-filled suit pulsed yellow with confusion. He pulled up the galactic record and confirmed what he already suspected. Lupus was listed as extinct. Obviously, this was an error. Humans kept domesticated animals as companions. He knew that much. They had creatures called dogs that had been bred from ancient wolves. Captain Vance must have listed her dog species incorrectly, using the extinct ancestor species instead of the proper domesticated designation. He corrected the entry to read domestic variant and approved the docking request. The modification took 3 seconds. Paul's moved on to the next request in the queue, already forgetting about the small administrative correction he had made. Sanctuary Station was enormous, a wheel spinning in space with enough room for 10,000 residents and visitors. It had docking bays for ships of every size, from personal craft to cargo haulers like Captain Vance's vessel. When her ship, a battered old freighter called the Mountain Runner, locked into its assigned bay, the station's sensors performed their standard scans for biological contamination, dangerous materials, and prohibited items. Everything came back clean. Sarah Vance went through decontamination, submitted to the standard health scan, and stepped through the airlock into the station proper. She was a woman in her mid-30s, wearing a worn flight jacket over practical cargo pants and boots. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her brown skin showed the kind of tan that came from spending time on planets with real sunlight rather than under artificial ship lights. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years in space and on dozens of different worlds. Behind her, padding through the airlock on 4 legs, came Ghost. The wolf stood at the human's hip, his thick gray and white fur still settling from the decontamination process. His amber eyes swept the corridor beyond the airlock, taking in everything with the alert intensity of a predator in unfamiliar territory. His ears swiveled forward and back, tracking sounds that the station's other occupants could not hear. His tail hung low and relaxed, but his muscles were coiled and ready beneath his winter coat. The airlock's inner door opened, and Sarah Vance stepped into Sanctuary Station's main concourse with an extinct species walking calmly at her side. The main concourse of Sanctuary Station was designed to accommodate the diversity of galactic species. The corridor was wide enough for the largest delegates to pass comfortably, with varying gravity zones marked clearly on the floor. The lighting adjusted automatically to be comfortable for different visual spectrums. Shops and offices lined both sides, offering everything from food to legal services to transport bookings. When Sarah Vance walked out of the airlock with Ghost beside her, the concourse was moderately busy. A merchant was arguing with a customer about shipping rates. A group floated past in their water suits, discussing some matter in burbling tones. A few humans stood near a cafe, drinking something that approximated coffee. Several other species moved about their business, barely glancing at the new arrivals. Then someone noticed the wolf. The customer stopped mid-argument, his reptilian eyes widening. His mouth fell open, revealing rows of sharp teeth meant for tearing meat. For a creature that was technically a predator species himself, he looked remarkably frightened. The merchant followed his customer's gaze and froze, all 4 of his arms going rigid. "What?" he clicked, his translator struggling to keep up with his rapidly accelerating speech. "What is that?" Sarah glanced down at Ghost, who was calmly observing the aliens with the same casual interest he might give to pigeons in a park. "This is Ghost," she said simply. "My partner." "That's a wolf," one of the humans near the cafe said, walking over with a grin. "Haven't seen one of those off-planet before. Can I pet him?" "Ask him yourself," Sarah replied. "He'll let you know." The human crouched down and extended his hand slowly, letting Ghost sniff it. The wolf considered for a moment, then allowed the human to scratch behind his ears. His tail gave a slow wag. More aliens were noticing now. A crowd began to form, keeping a respectful distance but staring with open fascination and no small amount of fear. Wolves were not large by the standards of galactic megafauna, but there was something about the way Ghost moved, the way he watched everyone with those amber eyes, that triggered deep instincts even in species that had evolved on worlds light years from Earth. "Excuse me," a young in an official-looking uniform approached, his suit pulsing an uncertain green color. This was Paul's head, drawn by the commotion. "Excuse me, Captain Vance. I processed your docking request. I believe there's been some confusion about your companion animal." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What kind of confusion?" "Well, your paperwork listed the species as lupus, but that species is extinct. I corrected it to the domestic variant. This is a dog, correct?" "No," Sarah said flatly. "Ghost is a wolf, lupus, gray wolf to be specific, from the northern Rockies population if you want to get technical about it." Paul's head suit flashed red, then yellow, then a confused orange. "But that's impossible. The species is extinct. The council confirmed it 3 weeks ago. Ambassador presented the findings himself." "Did he?" Sarah's tone was mild, but there was amusement dancing in her eyes. "Well, somebody should probably tell Ghost that he's extinct, though I don't think he'll care much." As if responding to his name, Ghost sat down and scratched behind his ear with his hind leg, the gesture so casual and alive that several aliens took an involuntary step backward. "I don't understand," Paul's head said weakly. "The surveys were comprehensive, 3 years of data, thermal scanning, audio monitoring, genetic sampling. If there were wolves on Earth, we would have found them." Sarah sighed and looked around at the growing crowd. "Is there someone in charge here I can talk to? Because I think we need to have a conversation about what your surveys actually found and what they missed." Within minutes, station security had arrived, not because Ghost posed any threat, but because a crowd of 50 beings was blocking the main concourse. Sarah and Ghost were politely but firmly escorted to an administrative office, where they waited while increasingly frantic messages were sent up the chain of command. Ghost lay down on the floor, utterly unconcerned with the chaos his presence was causing. Sarah scratched his head absently while she waited, watching through the office window as aliens pressed against the glass to stare at the impossible creature inside. 30 minutes later, Ambassador himself arrived, moving faster than his dignified bearing usually allowed. He entered the office, all 4 arms gesticulating in agitation, and stopped dead when he saw Ghost. The wolf looked up at the 7-foot-tall mantis-like alien with mild interest, then yawned, showing a mouth full of very impressive teeth. "That," said slowly, "is a lupus." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "A wolf." "Correct. But they're extinct." Sarah stood up, brushing off her pants. "Ambassador, I presume. I'm Sarah Vance and this is Ghost. We need to talk about your survey methodology because you've made a pretty significant error in your assessment of Earth's wildlife." His translator crackled as he tried to process this information. His sensory antennae waved in confusion. "Our surveys were comprehensive. 3 years of data collection using the most advanced technology in the galaxy. We found no evidence of wolf populations." "I believe you," Sarah said, "but that doesn't mean the wolves weren't there. It just means they're better at hiding than your sensors are at finding them." Ghost stood and shook himself, his fur rippling. The sound of his tags jingling seemed impossibly loud in the quiet office. He walked over to and sniffed at the ambassador's lowest leg, investigating this new creature with calm curiosity. Remained absolutely still, every instinct telling him not to move when a predator was this close. "This is impossible," he repeated. "Yeah," Sarah said with a slight smile. "You're going to want to call an emergency council session, because if you got the wolves wrong, I'm guessing there's a lot more about Earth you misunderstood." The emergency session was called for the following day, which in galactic bureaucratic terms was astonishingly fast. News of the impossible wolf had spread through Sanctuary Station like wildfire. By the time the council convened, there were crowds of aliens trying to get a glimpse of Ghost, and the station's security had to establish a perimeter around the conference room. Sarah and Ghost walked into the same crystalline chamber where had announced the wolf's extinction 3 weeks earlier. This time, every seat was filled. Representatives from more than 60 worlds had demanded to attend, and the overflow crowd watched via holographic feeds from other parts of the station. Ghost's claws clicked on the polished floor as he walked beside Sarah. His ears swiveled constantly, taking in the sounds of dozens of species all breathing, rustling, and murmuring in their various ways. His nose worked overtime processing the flood of new scents, but he stayed calm at Sarah's side, well-trained enough to ignore the distractions even though his wild instincts must have been screaming at him. Ambassador was already present, along with the rest of the human delegation. She caught Sarah's eye and gave her a small, approving nod. The other humans looked like they were trying very hard not to smile. Stood at his podium, looking less composed than he had 3 weeks ago. His exoskeleton seemed to have lost some of its luster, and his movements were jerky with stress. Representatives of the Galactic Conservation Council, he began, thank you for convening on such short notice. As you are all aware, a situation has developed that requires immediate attention and discussion. He gestured towards Sarah and Ghost. 3 weeks ago, I presented comprehensive survey data confirming the extinction of Earth's gray wolf. Today, a human captain has arrived at this station with a living specimen of that supposedly extinct species. This represents either a catastrophic failure of our survey methodology, or, he paused, clearly not wanting to say the alternative, or fraud, finished the delegate who had spoken at the previous meeting. His suit pulsed an angry red. Perhaps this creature is not what it appears to be. Genetic modification, perhaps, or a very convincing robotic recreation. Humans have shown themselves to be technologically creative if ecologically irresponsible. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. Ghost is neither modified nor robotic. He's a wolf, born wild in Yellowstone National Park about 4 years ago. I can provide his complete medical records, genetic profile, and the documentation of his capture and training if you'd like. Capture and training, Centeni quivered. You captured a wild predator and trained it. Humans have been doing that with wolves for about 15,000 years, Sarah said. That's actually how we got dogs. Some wolves started hanging around human camps, and over many generations they became domesticated. But the wild wolves stayed wild. They've been living alongside us, sometimes close and sometimes far away, for longer than recorded history. A scientist near the front raised her clawed hand. Our scans of this animal confirm it is biological, not mechanical. The genetic markers match the archived data for lupus, but this proves nothing about wild populations. This could be the last of its kind, kept as a curiosity. Ghost isn't the last, Sarah said firmly. There are thousands of wolves on Earth, probably tens of thousands across all populations. The chamber erupted in noise. Clicks, burbles, whistles, and various forms of speech overlapped as dozens of species all tried to talk at once. Had to activate the podium's attention chime 3 times before order was restored. Captain Vance, he said carefully, our surveys were extremely thorough. If there were thousands of large predators on Earth, we would have detected them. Our thermal imaging alone should have revealed any wolf populations. Sarah pulled out a small data pad and connected it to the chamber's display system. Ambassador provided me with some files last night. With your permission, I'd like to show them. Gestured his consent, all 4 arms moving in a pattern that indicated resigned curiosity. The holographic display above the podium filled with an image of a dense forest. Snow covered the ground, and the trees stood dark against white. This is thermal imaging of Yellowstone National Park in winter, Sarah explained. This is from human satellite data, similar quality to what your surveys would have used. The image showed scattered heat signatures, a few large ones that were probably elk or bison, smaller ones that might be birds or rodents, nothing that looked like a wolf pack. Now, Sarah said, switching to a different image. This is footage from a trail camera in the same area, same day. The new image showed a pack of 7 wolves moving through the same forest. They were clearly visible in the camera's view, gray and black shapes against the snow, but in the thermal image they had been nearly invisible. Wolves are efficient, Sarah explained. Their fur is incredible insulation. In winter, their body heat barely radiates through it. Your thermal sensors probably picked them up as small heat signatures, maybe mistook them for dogs or coyotes, and filtered them out as non-significant. She switched to another image. This is audio data from Montana. The display showed a waveform, the kind used to visualize sound. Your report said you detected no howling. This is a spectrogram of wolf howls recorded by human wildlife biologists. The pattern on the display was there, but subtle, mixed in with wind noise, bird calls, and other natural sounds. Wolves don't howl constantly. They're actually pretty quiet most of the time. When they do howl, it's usually at dawn or dusk, often in remote areas. If your audio sensors were calibrated to detect constant or frequent vocalizations, you probably missed most of the wolf communication. Antennae were practically vibrating now, and the genetic sampling. Wolves are careful, Sarah said. They stick to game trails and wild areas. They avoid human settlements most of the time. If you were sampling environmental DNA near human populations or in heavily trafficked areas, you wouldn't find much wolf DNA. You'd need to sample in the backcountry, and even then, one pack might range over hundreds of square kilometers. It's not easy to find them if they don't want to be found. A long silence followed. Ghost chose that moment to stand up and shake himself again, the sound of his first settling impossibly loud in the quiet chamber. He looked around at the assembled aliens with what could only be described as mild contempt, then lay back down with his head on his paws. "You're saying," said slowly, "that we spent 3 years surveying your planet and completely missed thousands of apex predators because they're good at hiding." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Sarah confirmed. "Wolves are survivors. They've survived ice ages, climate shifts, and yeah, they almost didn't survive us. But they're still here. They came back." "Came back?" This was from the scientist. "You mean they were nearly extinct and recovered?" Sarah nodded. By the 1970s, wolves in the lower United States were almost gone. We'd hunted them, poisoned them, destroyed their habitats. There were maybe a few hundred left in Minnesota and Iowa. In the western U.S., they were functionally extinct. She pulled up more images, graphs showing population numbers dropping toward zero, then climbing back up, maps showing wolf territories shrinking and then expanding again. But then we changed course. We passed the Endangered Species Act. We protected the remaining wolves. We reintroduced them to places like Yellowstone where they'd been wiped out, and the wolves came back. The data she showed was comprehensive. Population estimates over decades, territory maps, genetic studies showing the health of recovered populations, ecological studies demonstrating the positive effects of wolf reintroduction on entire ecosystems. The current estimated population in the northern Rockies alone is over 2,000 animals, Sarah said. Canada and Alaska have thriving populations. Russia's wolf population might be as high as 40 or 50,000. They're in Mongolia, the Himalayas, Scandinavia, Eastern Europe. They're not extinct. They're not even endangered in most of their range anymore. She looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens. You surveyed Earth and saw a world damaged by industrialization and overpopulation. And you're not wrong. We've done enormous damage, but you missed what we've been doing to fix it. Ghost raised his head and looked directly at, as if to emphasize his human's point. His amber eyes were calm and intelligent and completely unconcerned with galactic politics. "This is unprecedented," said finally. In all the Council's history, we have never had a survey be this wrong about a major species. We pride ourselves on our accuracy." "Maybe," Sarah suggested gently, "you've never surveyed a species that actually succeeded in bringing back a predator from the edge of extinction. Maybe that's not something you expected to find, so you weren't looking for signs of it." The implications of that statement hung in the air. The Council's entire purpose was to document ecological disasters and help species avoid them. The idea that a species might actually reverse such disasters, might bring extinct or near-extinct species back, wasn't part of their standard model. "I move," Ambassador said, standing up in the human section, "that the Council conduct a new, more comprehensive survey of Earth's wildlife, with input and guidance from human ecologists and wildlife biologists. Our planet clearly requires a more nuanced assessment than standard survey protocols provide." "Seconded," said one of the other human delegates. Looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. Most looked shocked, some looked skeptical, but a few were beginning to show what might have been hope or curiosity. The scientist was already making notes on a data pad, her claws moving rapidly. "The motion is acknowledged," said. "We will reconvene tomorrow to discuss survey protocols. In the meantime, I believe Captain Vance's companion animal requires proper documentation as a living specimen of a species we will shortly be removing from the extinction list." Sarah grinned. "Ghost would appreciate that. He's very particular about his official documentation being accurate." The wolf, hearing his name, stood up and stretched, his front legs extended and his rear end up in a pose that made him look more like a playful dog than a fierce predator. Then he yawned again, showing all those impressive teeth, and the reminder of what he truly was sent another ripple of nervous movement through the assembled aliens. The session was adjourned, though the conversations continued long into the station's night cycle. Sarah and Ghost became unexpected celebrities, though the wolf handled the attention with much better grace than most of the aliens handled being near him. He let the braver scan him, take samples, and document every aspect of his biology, though he drew the line at being touched by anyone except Sarah and a select few others he deemed acceptable. By the next morning, the story had spread across the galactic network. Earth, the world whose ecological disasters were being held up as cautionary tales, had actually brought a species back from near extinction. The planet that had lost its wolves had found them again, or rather, had helped them find their way back. The Council's next session focused on planning a new survey, one that would include human experts and look for signs not just of ecological damage, but of recovery and restoration. Sarah was asked to stay and consult, though she insisted Ghost would need some time on an actual planet soon, because space stations weren't ideal for wolves. "He needs room to run," she explained. "Trees to mark, ground to dig. He's being patient with all this, but he's still wild at heart." Who had spent the night reviewing decades of human wildlife data, nodded his understanding. "We have much to learn about your species, Captain Vance. Not just about the wolves, but about humans themselves." "We're complicated," Sarah admitted. "We've done terrible things to our planet and the species we share it with, but we're also the only species that looks at what we've destroyed and actively tries to bring it back. We fail a lot, but sometimes we succeed." She looked down at Ghost, who was lying at her feet, perfectly relaxed despite being on a space station surrounded by aliens. "The wolves are proof that it's possible. When we almost lost them, we realized what we'd be losing, so we fought to bring them back, and they met us halfway." Ghost's tail thumped against the floor twice, as if in agreement. 3 months after Sarah Vance and Ghost arrived at Sanctuary Station, the Galactic Conservation Council released its updated assessment of Earth. The report was substantially different from the first one. Yes, Earth had suffered extensive ecological damage during its industrial period. Yes, many species had been lost to human activity. But the new survey, conducted with human input and a better understanding of how to look for recovering species revealed a more complex picture. Wolves were not the only species making a comeback. Bald eagles, once nearly extinct from pesticide poisoning, now thrived. Humpback whale populations were recovering from near extinction. American alligators, California condors, and dozens of other species were being pulled back from the brink through active conservation efforts. The report documented not just humanity's failures, but its attempts at redemption. The new report noted something else too, something that fascinated across the galaxy. Humans had not simply preserved their endangered species in isolation. They had reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone and watched as the wolves changed the entire ecosystem, bringing back balance to prey populations, and even affecting the growth patterns of trees and the courses of rivers. This was called trophic cascades, and it demonstrated an understanding of ecology that went beyond simple preservation. Earth, the report concluded, was a world in transition. Its dominant species had caused enormous harm, but that same species was now working to repair the damage. The report recommended continued monitoring, not as a cautionary tale, but as a case study in ecological restoration that other worlds might learn from. Sarah Vance eventually left Sanctuary Station and returned to Earth, bringing Ghost back to the mountains where he belonged. But before she left, she did one final demonstration for the Council. She took Ghost to an observation deck where the curve of Earth was visible below, blue and white and impossibly beautiful. A crowd of aliens gathered to watch, curious about what the human woman and her impossible wolf would do. Sarah knelt down next to Ghost and simply said, "Speak." Ghost tilted his head back and howled. The sound started low and rose high, a wild and mournful song that spoke of forests and mountains, of pack bonds and hunting, of survival against impossible odds. It was a sound that had echoed across Earth for hundreds of thousands of years, a sound that humans had nearly silenced forever, but that still rang out across the wilderness. The aliens fell silent, listening to this voice from a species they had declared extinct, feeling the raw power and ancient wisdom in that sound. Some of them would later say it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing they had ever heard. When Ghost finished his howl and looked up at Sarah with satisfied eyes, she scratched behind his ears and said quietly, "Good boy." The report was officially updated that day. Lupus was removed from the extinction list with a special notation, "Species recovery in progress, evidence of successful conservation partnership between Homo and Lupus. Continued monitoring recommended to document restoration strategies." In the years that followed, Earth's application to join the galactic community was viewed in a new light. Yes, humans were destructive and had damaged their world, but they were also capable of recognizing their mistakes and working to fix them. They were capable of bringing back species from the edge of extinction, of restoring balance to ecosystems, of living alongside predators that could easily kill them. The wolves became symbols of something the galactic community had rarely seen, a species that nearly destroyed itself and its world but turned back from that brink. Humans were flawed, certainly, dangerous potentially, but also capable of change, of growth, of redemption. And whenever ambassadors from Earth attended galactic functions, they liked to share images and videos of wolves. Wolves running through snow, wolves raising pups, wolves howling at the moon. A reminder that extinction is not always permanent, that damaged ecosystems can heal, and that sometimes the species you write off as lost can come back stronger than ever. Sarah Vance became something of a legend in her own right. She continued her work as a freighter captain, but she also became an unofficial ambassador for Earth's conservation efforts. She traveled to other worlds, met with other species, and told the story of how humans and wolves learned to coexist again. And Ghost, he lived out his life in the mountains of Montana, running with his pack, hunting elk and raising pups of his own. He was never just a pet or a symbol. He remained what he had always been, A wild wolf, apex predator, survivor of ice ages and human expansion, proof that some things are too wild and too essential to ever truly disappear. Sometimes, on clear nights when the stars were bright above Yellowstone, his howls would echo across the valleys. And somewhere up on Sanctuary Station, aliens would play recordings of those howls for visitors, telling them the story of the species that refused to stay extinct and the humans who helped them come back. It was, in its own way, the most human story the galaxy had ever heard. A story of failure and redemption, of destruction and restoration, of almost losing something precious and fighting to get it back. It was a story that gave hope to other species facing their own ecological crises. Because if humans could bring back the wolves, if they could restore balance to their damaged world, then perhaps there was hope for others too. Perhaps extinction didn't have to be the end of the story. Perhaps, with enough determination and wisdom and willingness to change, even the most damaged ecosystems could heal. The wolves had come back, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy something it badly needed to see: that the future was not written, that disasters could be averted, and that sometimes the most dangerous species could become the most dedicated protectors of their world. Ghost never knew he was a symbol or a legend. He only knew the wind in his fur, the taste of fresh meat, the bonds of his pack, and the occasional visit from a human who had once been his partner in an adventure among the stars. He lived his life as wolves had always lived, wild and free, and unconcerned with the opinions of aliens light years away. And that perhaps was the most important part of the story. The wolves had not come back because they wanted to prove anything to humanity or the galaxy. They had come back simply because they were wolves, and wolves endure. They survive. They adapt. They persist. Humanity had almost destroyed them, but humanity had also saved them. And in saving the wolves, perhaps humans had saved something essential about themselves too: the ability